A little bit of a misnomer as we kind of passed on from Elisha's life, but we're leaving that. We decided just to go on with a study on 2 Kings. So, there's a lot of names and chronologies and things move fast in these books, but I have personally really enjoyed studying out the book of 2 Kings, and we're pulling out some isolated stories that have an application for our lives. And so we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 16, if you turn there in your Bibles, 2 Kings chapter 16, and we're going to kind of finish up on some information and conclude some information on the northern kings next week. Maybe get to some of it this week, but we're going to jump to the southern kingdom. So that chart, for any of you who don't have that chart, it might be beneficial for you to slip to the back of the foyer area and grab one of these charts if you don't have one. And as we follow along, we're going to kind of conclude some information on the northern kingdom and then jump into some other things in the southern kingdom in weeks to come. I don't know how many more weeks we'll have. We'll rush through. We won't look at all the kings in detail. And in fact, some of these chapters have very little to say about some of them. But the guy we'll be looking at today is an interesting character. His name is Ahaz. He's a king of the southern kingdom. So we're in 2 Kings chapter 16. And I'll read to begin the first 4 verses with you. It says, in the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. 20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign. And he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God, like David his father. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, yea, and made his son to pass through the fire, according to the abomination of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel. And he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. So we're going to look at this interesting guy by the name of Ahaz. His father's name was Jotham, and we can see from the previous chapter that Jotham, he's listed on your chart as a good king. About halfway down the kings of the southern kingdom, Jotham was listed as a good king, but we find the word howbeit. When you see the word howbeit, draw attention to that. That means nevertheless or but. Here's an exception to this. He's listed as a good king, considered generally good, but there's some problems. Back in chapter 15, verse 35, it says, howbeit the high places were not removed, the people sacrificed and burnt incense still in the high places. He built the higher gate of the house of the Lord, and then talks about the rest of the acts of Jotham, and he died. And it also lists the beginning of some rumblings in the nations around him. I want you to make a distinction in your mind today, because we'll discuss it. There are 2 empires that are at play here in this period of nations, the nation of Israel's history, with both the northern and the kingdom side. One of them is Syria, whose king at that time was a guy by the name of Rezin, and the other one is Assyria, and their king at that time was Tiglath-Pileser. So we may get confused. We're throwing a lot of different countries, a lot of different names out, but the Syrian Empire and the Assyrian Empire come into play in this particular passage. So although his father, Ahaz's father, was a good king, it's obvious from this passage that Ahaz was not. Pastor said to me, to all of us in a congregation several years ago, a statement that I've never forgotten. I may have used it in the past. I want to say it's not universally true, but some of you may have heard this before. Directing comments to dads, perhaps it was a Father's Day message, he said, what you do in moderation, your children will do in excess. Have you ever heard that statement before? As it relates to parents. What you do in moderation, your children will do in excess. It's kind of a stern, sobering warning to us. I will say this, having met many fathers and engaged in many lives, that is not universally true. Also, I should say this. They hardly ever say that statement in relation to good things. But there are some men who were saved later in life, who wanted to do the right thing and wanted to be a good example to their children, but maybe they carried some vices or had some rough edges in their lives and sought to do things later in life. And I hope and pray that that principle would apply to men who are doing their best to do the right thing. And although they didn't quite become the men that they would have dreamed they would become spiritually, their children saw the sincerity of their fathers, and they said, we're going to take that baton and run with it, and we're going to live a godly life. My dad wasn't always the greatest example, but I'm going to learn from him and see his heart and follow on that legacy in his life. That statement is rarely used in relation to good things. It's usually a scare tactic to fathers to say, make sure how you walk, because if you fail to be committed in some areas, your children may do it in abundance. Now, that doesn't always happen, but in this case, Jotham and Ahaz, it was the case. It says to Jotham, who's listed on your chart, by the way, as a good king, it says, howbeit, nevertheless, in spite of that, he didn't completely remove idolatry from his land. And he didn't eliminate that negative influences. He had a good heart. He wanted to do the right thing. He loved God. He wanted to honor God, but he didn't eradicate idolatry. And so what he did in moderation, his son did in excess. And it says when Ahaz came on the scene, he did not do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. And in fact, there's a statement at verse number 3 in chapter 16, which is worth repeating. It says, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Well, that's interesting because he's a king of Judah. So was his father a king of Judah. He succeeded his father. But he didn't follow the example of his father. He followed the example of the kings from the northern empire, which, need I remind you, were all, according to this middle chart in their character, they were all bad. All the kings of the northern kingdom were bad. He didn't even follow the example of his own father. He followed the example of the kings from the north. And consequently, he was not a good man. It says he did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord. Among other things, he made his own children to pass through the fire. Now, some of you know what that means. There's serious implications of that statement. There was a god, originally a Moabite god named Molech, called Molech, a false god, an imaginary god. And the way that they would engage in worship of Molech is they would take metal, they would melt it down, they would create a big image or idol of this false god Molech, and they would surround it by burning material, light it on fire, heat the idol up till it was searing hot. And when they created this idol, they made, if you look in an encyclopedia or Google this, you can see if you look up the god Molech, the false god Molech, he would have his hands extended and with fire burning all around him and the metal becoming searing hot, people would literally take their children and toss them into the open arms of this false god, where of course they would be killed. Their own children. Imagine that. So this is a king of Judah. This is a king from the better half of the kingdom, the southern tribe, who was following this pagan practice of offering his own son and other people's sons, perhaps daughters, to this false god. By the way, when I read the report about this, and I looked at the research of how this worship took place, people would chant. The people around in that pagan atmosphere, in this idolatrous ceremony, would chant out loud so as to drown out the cries of the suffering of the children who were being sacrificed. We think to ourselves, how could anybody do that to their own children? This king of Judah was engaged in that type of a practice. And I don't have to remind you that the Bible says that God values life. He tells us to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice to himself. And whereas Satan comes to kill and to steal and to destroy, Jesus came to give us life and give it more abundantly. God has always protected the value of life and cherished the value of life, but Satan would always destroy. And this false practice was nothing short of Satanism at its very worst. So this is how he came on the scene. He's following examples of these false gods. He's offering his own children in sacrifice to Molech. He's on a bad path in life. And so God says, I've had enough. I'm going to judge him. He did so in a very interesting way. according to verse number 5 and following of this chapter, you'll find out that there was an alliance made between two kings, the king of Syria, Rezin, and curiously, the king of the northern empire named Pekah. So they're blood relatives. They're part of the 12 tribes. They're family. The king of the north develops an alliance with a Syrian king to march against Ahaz in the south, whose throne was centered in Jerusalem. This unholy alliance takes place in this setting here. And Jerusalem was heavily fortified. It was customary when kings would attack a city like that to besiege it. They could not destroy the walls or get in to engage in battle without heavy casualties. So they just took their armies and they just put them on the outside of the city and besieged it. They would not allow any food or water or resources to come into the city, and they would just wait it out. And Ahaz understood what was going on. That was a common practice, and he says, we can't have this. We've got to do something to save ourselves. And in verses 7 through 9, he sends a messenger out. Look in verse number 7. Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. Okay, now the Syrian king, Rezin, is besieging Jerusalem, and so he enlists the help of the Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser. He says, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it and carried the people out of it captive to Kir and slew Rezin. So he got a messenger out, perhaps by night, who went away and says, we'll pay you whatever it takes. We'll give you a great present, a great bribe if you come and help me. And the king of Assyria said, yeah, I'll do that. And how he relieved the pressure on King Ahaz is he attacked the Syrian capital city of Damascus and started killing people. And when they heard, the people that besieged the city heard that this other empire had attacked their hometown, they left and they delivered Ahaz and the people of Jerusalem. They left to go back, and Tiglath-Pileser had a great victory there. And he's in Damascus, taking the spoils of war, carrying away some captives, mopping up the operations there. And Ahaz, perhaps out of appreciation, I don't know exactly what his mindset was, but he said, I'm going to go see my new buddy, Tiglath-Pileser. I'm going to go visit him and thank him personally, or just kind of rub shoulders with him. He's the kind of guy I want to have on my team. He just took care of this big problem here. He killed the king of Syria, delivered my people from starvation and bondage, and he made the trip to Damascus to see his new friend, Tiglath-Pileser. While he's there, he notices that Rezin, the king of Syria, had set up a form of worship there. He had all the modern worship equipment. He had a new altar, a different kind of an altar. He had a new system of worship. And for some strange reason, Ahaz says, I need to get in on this new religion. This is great. And in fact, he went so far as, if you read on, to get specifications of the altar. He was very impressed with the altar. And he had somebody take measurements and list the materials that were made. And he couldn't even wait till he got back home to Jerusalem. He sent word to his priest, and he said, I want you to construct an altar just like this. In order to do so, keep it in mind, he had just sent many of the temple materials. The gold and silver he used to pay off Tiglath-Pileser to come rescue him with his armies. He sent all these precious metals there. So he had no great materials to build this new altar. So what did he do? He took their altar and their instruments of worship and took them apart, broke them down, and created this new altar, complete with this new form of worship. Now, here was a man that weeks or months earlier had offered his own children up in sacrifice to Moloch. There's no limit to what he would do. He was the kind of guy that wanted to impress others. I don't know what his entire motives were, whether it was to let his new buddy know that, hey, he's not limited by the worship of Jehovah alone. Maybe he wanted to try something new. People are like that. Just want to try something new, a new form of worship, the next newest thing. I don't know if you like the newest things. My wife and I were talking last night. We're having technical difficulties around our house, and I said, whatever happened to the old ways? The old ways are the good ways. Things are so easy to operate. And technology and I are not friends. We're just not friends. I'm having real problems adjusting to the modern era. And if I didn't have Pastor Rocky in my life, I would really be in trouble. He just takes things like that and figures them out in a matter of... And we're training Levi to take his place down the road too. He just like that kind of stuff. I just like... The old ways were simple ways. Can I get an amen out of our older generation? These new things, I have a hard time learning all these new... My learning curve is not there. And people sometimes are prone to want to change just for the sake of changing. And here's Ahaz adopting all of this new system of worship, engaging his own high priest, a man by the name of Urijah, and is changing everything about the worship in the capital city of the southern empire, in the city of David, Jerusalem. Things are changing. Well, you might imagine that God was not pleased with that. You can turn there if you want to. I'm going to read a passage, a parallel passage about God's attitude toward Ahaz when he adopted this new form of worship and was making these changes and compromises in his life. In 2 Chronicles chapter 28, let me read to you verses 24 and 25. And Ahaz gathered together the vessels of the house of God and cut in pieces the vessels of the house of God and shut up the doors of the house of the Lord. And he made him altars in every corner of Jerusalem and in every several city of Judah. Remember the outlying areas of the county areas? He made high places to burn incense unto other gods and provoked to anger the Lord God of his fathers. He shut down the church. He closed down the church and said, let's set these centers of pagan worship all over the city. And if that's not good enough, for the people that live in the outlying areas, let's set up all these centers of worship for idolatry, which has caused some men to claim that although the southern kings of Judah were head and shoulders above the northern kings, spiritually speaking, as a general rule, they said Ahaz may well have been the worst southern king, spiritually speaking, of them all. There's some good men in that southern group. Hezekiah, who we'll discuss next week, who, by the way, was the son. So like I said, maybe what we do in moderation, our kids will do in excess. Maybe any attempts that we have to serve God with a true heart and an honest heart will reflect upon our children and our grandchildren one day. But to make matters worse, he just completely shut down the worship of Jehovah and has set up these pagan practices all over. And it's a warning to modern day preachers who seem bent on making relationships with people who are not even saved. Bringing into their churches people that don't even have a godly testimony and putting them before their people and saying, hey, we have this great celebrity here today. A person who's living like the devil, who has no regard for God, no relationship with Jesus Christ, but because they have a big name and they'll attract a big crowd, they'll bring people to their places of worship and put them in a position of prominence. They'll adopt practices from the world. Because the world does it, we've got to do it too. And this chapter stands as a warning that God wants us to worship him in spirit and in truth and to magnify his word. And unfortunately, this practice did not stop here. It extended to others as well. So I just wanted to cover him. And now I want to jump into chapter 17. If you look over there, and we're going to discuss a really significant change in not only the book of 2 Kings, but of history itself. And this is the one, Alan, if we get to, we're going to actually have points in this. I'm running back and forth. Let me find my points. It's in my outline here, but I'll use it for a bookmark. We're going to have points to this particular chapter. This chapter marks an important transition. It is the end of the Northern Empire as we know it. So, again, alluding to your chart, if you have your chart, the kings of Israel to the north, several are listed. You may see that the last one listed there is 722 BC. That is the period covered in chapter 17 of 2 Kings. Now, the southern kingdom lasts much longer. It goes to 586 BC, but we're going to find the end of the northern kingdom as we know it. We have many years passed since the glory days of Solomon's empire and all that with the nation of Israel and their influence, their military might, their financial wealth, their prosperity, God's hand of blessing upon them. But from the very beginning of the northern kingdom to the very end, it lasted about 200 years. I just throw that out at you because some of you may know we're celebrating a birthday as a nation this week, about our 250th, right? 1776, close to 250 year, birthday as a nation. Where we've been around as a nation longer than the northern kingdom, but relatively speaking, somewhat in the near time period. And the nation that God would use to bring the northern kingdom to its knees was ironically Assyria. Remember Tiglath-Pileser? And Ahaz paid him all this money and said, "Come deliver us, help us." I would have liked Ahaz to say, "God, we want to be your servant. You are our helper. We look to you. Could you come help us?" He should have cried out to his God, but he cried out to a pagan king. And that pagan king he cried out to, Tiglath-Pileser, had a reign of about 5 years. But that relationship that was established, so much so that Ahaz went to Damascus to say, "I want to see my new buddy here and be friends with him." That same empire was the one that brought about the destruction of the northern empire. And the king that succeeded Tiglath-Pileser was a guy named Shalmaneser. He's spoken about in chapter 17. So let's pick it up there in chapter 17. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. Again, if you look at this chart, Hoshea was the last king of the northern empire. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, no surprise to us, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. So he was bad, he just wasn't as bad as them. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. Must have been Shalmaneser's birthday, right? No, it meant that he bribed him. We want to keep you, it's kind of like, for those of you who've been engaged in litigation, it's like paying a retainer fee to an attorney. We want to, we'll pay you this money so we know you're on our side, you're available if we need you, kind of a thing. And that's the relationship that they had. And what was going on here was, as the northern kingdom was weakening spiritually and financially, they're giving all their money, their gold and silver and everything they can away to bribe these other kings to help them, and morally, and in every way possible, they were growing weaker. The Assyrians were growing stronger by the day. And they occupied, the Assyrians, this territory north of Israel, which is now modern-day Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. If you want to put it in perspective geographically, modern-day Syria and Iraq and Turkey is where the Assyrian Empire was centered. And their new king, based upon not biblical but historical records, was apparently the son of Tiglath-Pileser. So his son succeeded him. And there's a reference in verse number 3 to King Hoshea. Being the king of the northern kingdom, he was giving him these presents or these bribes, and it seems like that was working out. But for some reason, Hoshea got tired of that. He says, "I'm done with that. I don't like him. I never liked him. I'm just faking it. And I'm no longer going to keep this alliance going. But I don't want to make myself or my people vulnerable to him. He'll get mad when he finds out." And by the way, he found out, the Bible tells us how he found out that Ahaz had turned against him. He stopped sending presents. If you want to bribe someone, you got to keep those presents coming. You stop giving him money, stop sending gifts to him. He said, "Hey, what's going on? We haven't got anything from Hoshea for a long time. And go check into this." And they found out he had developed a relationship with the king of Egypt and formed a new alliance there. And the king of Egypt's name was So. S-O, So. And Shalmaneser said, no, we're not going to put up with any of that. And he went over there, took the king, took Hoshea, threw him in prison, locked him up, where he would spend the rest of his life. And if that wasn't enough, he was angry that the northern tribe rebelled against him, and he marched on them, and he attacked them. He was going to show them in a very strong way that he didn't appreciate. Verse 5 says he came up throughout all the land, came and marched against Samaria, the capital of the northern tribe, and besieged it for 3 years. And finally they said, we can't resist anymore. They gave up, and that was that. Now, the Assyrians adopted a practice that has since been utilized by many nations. What they would do. Sometimes when a stronger, powerful army would attack someone, they would just kill their leaders. They would wipe out anybody in leadership. That practice has happened in the Middle East in recent years, and take over their government and so forth. That wasn't their practice. They would take the people and they would exile them. The Romans didn't do that. The Romans, when they attacked people and they took over their regions, they left everything in place. And they sent their own garrisons or soldiers to that area and made sure the people, did what they were supposed to do and paid tribute to the Roman government. And that was their strategy for dealing with defeated nations. The Assyrians did something different. They exiled people. They took the main majority of the people that were there and they removed them and put them in other territories that they had control over. Even people groups that were not Assyrian. They put them there, spread them out, and put them in these regions, and brought people from those regions and put them in positions of authority in the defeated area, in this case Samaria. And they would just let things play out like that. I was trying to think of an example of that, and this is maybe a crude example, but it's my example, so I'm going to give it to you nevertheless. When I was in high school, in my younger high school years, 9th grade, 10th grade, I got an interest in pigeons. Raising pigeons. Why, I don't know. I can't stand pigeons today. I go down on Shields Avenue by Bank of America there, and some knucklehead shows up repeatedly during the week, and they just scatter all this pigeon food all over the ground, and pigeons come, and they cut down 2 palm trees here. That was a favorite hangout for pigeons in the area, and they would pigeons leave their droppings all over. Pigeons offer no possible. I know we have some animal lovers. Benita, please forgive me, but I just don't. I'm just not a pigeon fan. I don't like. But back then it was cool to have pigeons. And particularly we had homing pigeons. And the neat thing about them is that when you release them and they go fly around, then they come back. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Because when you go to your friend, I want to buy some of your pigeons, and you get those pigeons and you build a cage and you feed them. If you let them out too soon or under the wrong circumstances, they'll fly the coop and they'll go right back to where they came from. That's their nature, is to go back, and they somehow can go miles away. They use these animals in wartime to bring messages. They're just smart animals. So you had to figure out a way to get those pigeons to come back to your coop, because they were your pigeons. Anybody here raise pigeons, or you have any experience? Oh, a couple of you do. You guys will know what I'm talking about. So here's what you'd have to do. You can either keep them in your cage indefinitely and wait for the next generation to come down, or you can clip their wings, which is I never felt comfortable clipping the wings so they can't fly away. Or you can wait until they mate with other pigeons in your group and have babies. And they're sometimes have better character than some of us adults. They are loyal to their children. So if you buy pigeons from someone else and you keep them a month or 2 or 3 and you let them out, don't be surprised. In fact, my friends, shamelessly, when my friends would see other people's pigeons flying up in the sky around our neighborhood, they would quickly go out and release their pigeons. they would usually group together, and depending on which pigeons were more loyal, those pigeons mostly would follow one or the other back to the coop. And my friends would literally bribe me. I had to pay them fees to get my own pigeons back, even when I bought them from them. Hey, they came back to our coop, So, but if they mated and had little baby pigeons, you were good. You were good to go, because they would always come back to your coop. They were assimilated. That's what was happening to the exiles from the northern kingdom. They were assimilated into these other regions. They took them and brought them to cities like Hoshea, not Hoshea. The cities that were mentioned there are two of them are mentioned here. Starting with the letter H. What is it? Oh, here it is. Hala and Habor. They would take the kings from the northern kingdom and send them to Hala or Habor, and the people would live in those territories and they would become assimilated. I think they really couldn't figure out what else to do. They were taken a long ways away. They were separated from most of the people they knew. Family members were torn apart. Even immediate family members were separated. And they got there and they started living life and surviving, and they said, what are we going to do? Let's just stay here. So when we speak about the 10 lost tribes of Israel, they were not so much lost as they were assimilated. Remember this colorful history. Under Jacob had 12 sons. Each of the sons was given a territory as their inheritance, and those 12 tribes were established. There was a civil war after Solomon. 10 of the tribes remained in the northern kingdom, 2 in the southern kingdom. Now the 10 tribes of the north are no more. At 722 BC, even historical records, not that we need them to, even historical records tell us how the northern kingdom ceased to exist. That hasn't stopped people from speculating about what has happened to these lost tribes of Israel. And for that, I give you some alternatives. I'm going to throw those out at you and let you know what could have possibly happened. I'm running out of time, but let me give you some examples of groups that have claimed ownership of these 10 lost tribes. There's a group called the Pathan. The Pathan is a Muslim fundamentalist group, and they reside in northern Afghanistan and Pakistan, and they claim they're actually the lost tribes of Israel, that they're descendants of the lost tribe of Israel. By the way, modern day DNA research has been very enlightening, does many good things. It finds those lost relatives you never knew you had. Almost all of us know people that have had these DNA searches, whatever, and they found, I got these relatives I didn't know about. My uncle, who, before he became a Christian, lived a less than moral life, was contacted by a complete stranger. Actually, the person first contacted my brother, Rob, and said, "Hey, we're from the same family, the same bloodline." And they did some research and found out my uncle had an illegitimate child. He didn't know it. He had a one-night stand with a woman, and she became pregnant. She gave birth to a child and never told him. She didn't even care about him. She never told him he was the father of the child. She raised that daughter to adulthood, and that daughter had one of those DNA searches done and found out that he was the father of that child. So I don't know how you would have responded to a situation like that. My brother called me up. He said, "Hey, Chuck, I found this out. I've been in contact with this lady, and it's beyond." We found out where she was at that time, where this mother was at that time, where she was living, and it's all but certain Glenn is the father of this now grown adult woman who is married, has her own children. And he said to me, "Should I tell Glenn about that?" I don't know what you would have done, but I didn't know what to tell him. I said, I don't know, Rob. I mean, he's my uncle. I just went to his wife's, my aunt's funeral service a couple months ago. You may remember. He's in his 80s. This is back when he was in his early 70s. And he said, should I let Glenn know he has his daughter living back east? I said, I don't know, Rob. I don't know what to tell you about that. I said to him, If you were in Glenn's situation, would you want to know you had a daughter? Biological daughter that you've not had any contact with all these years? And you know what he said to me? I don't know. So we both didn't know what to do about it. I don't know what you would have done, but my brother Rob finally felt he had a moral obligation to inform my uncle that there's a good chance he had a daughter that he never met, never knew. And my uncle's response to that was, cool. Well, that's great, but I don't know about my aunt. How would my aunt would have handled that? She was like, people are strange. People are different. People react differently to different situations. My uncle went through the trouble of flying back east, meeting his biological daughter, and even went so far as to put her in contact with my wife. I say me, but I don't do Facebooking. So my wife has had contact with this really nice lady back. Which state is she in, Lise? Some northern state somewhere, Minnesota or something. I don't know where she is. Pennsylvania, yeah. And I don't know. But I'm not gonna be flying out there anytime soon to meet my cousin, but whom I've never met before. But how did I get on that? I was talking about these Muslim fundamentalists who say we're the direct descendants of the 10 lost tribes. Then they've done DNA research and found out that they're not. You might think that might have caused the Muslim people to say, "Oh, okay, then we'll change. No, they're just saying we deny it. We deny science. We deny DNA. We deny research." They still claim to be the descendants of the 10 lost tribes. Oliver Cromwell, that name familiar to some of you? An Englishman. He claimed that the English people were descendants. Now that's a real stretch. That the English people were descendants of the 10 lost tribes, and he did so to his death. DNA research has proven that incorrect. In the Book of Mormon, for our Mormon friends, in the Book of Mormon there are a lot of fantastical stories. If you like science fiction, read the Book of Mormon. There's a lot of science fiction in that. And they claim there's a group called the Nephites who were actually the blood relatives, descendants of those 10 lost tribes of Israel, and that they came to America. You have to appreciate this if you have a sense of humor. The Mormons, Brigham Young also claimed that there were men living on the moon, and he claimed he had a telescope that you could see them, and he even described how they looked, and they were walking around on the moon, before scientists had proven that you cannot sustain life on the moon, but they have a lot of fantastical stories. So he claimed the Nephites were descendants of the 10 lost tribes, and they came to America, and they were actually the early American native Indians, and that they were the descendants of the 10 lost tribes. DNA evidence has proven otherwise. So that was a fantasy. It was a story. But there is one group. There's one group that it is believed in my research that there's still hundreds of them living today, but they were living in abundance during the days of Jesus, who actually were indirectly related to the 10 lost tribes. I say indirectly because the 10 lost tribes were assimilated into these cultures and these culture groups and intermarried with the people where they went. And one of the people groups that they lived with and intermarried with and established communities with became, during the days of Jesus, the what? Anybody know? Say it out loud. Somebody said that. Who said that? You said that? How did you know that? You must have a smart husband. How did you know that? She's a good teacher. The Samaritans of Jesus' day were biologically half-breeds, mixed race people of the original northern tribes with the Assyrian settlements where they went, and one of the groups that survived to the days of Jesus and is even a small population of them alive today, keeping their indigenous group, are the Samaritans. And I can't offer you any more fantasy stories. The only thing I can say of those lost tribes, the only remnant we have of anything having to do with these 10 tribes of Israel is the Samaritans, biologically, genetically derived from those tribes today. So this passage marks an incredible change in history. Starting next week, the northern kingdom is no more. Say, what about the southern kingdom? Well, we'll discuss that when we get back next week.